Buongiorno a tutti, buongiorno ai nostri relatori, buongiorno
Good morning to everybody, to the speakers, the listeners. Today we're going to talk about Libya, a very important topic, and the breaching and violation of human rights and of human, civilian, and political rights, and human rights, which contains them all, and of the very important theme which has got to do with Libya, but with many other countries as well, and the impunity of the violation of any such rights. Today, we will be focusing on Libya, a beautiful country torn by violence and war. The population in these past decades has suffered serious and continuous violations of civil and human rights, massacres, mass graves, rapes, tortures, violences with respect to migrants and of convicts, and almost always unjustly. And the same, we are also appalled by the impunity of perpetrators, principals, and executors. But there is a light, however, a hope. A path has been started, a peace path and a peace direction, which seemed to be impossible only a few months ago. There are subtle positive signs, and we are trying to find a peace solution, a just solution to put an end to these internal wars and external as well. Today, we will talk about one of the essential pillars for a lasting peace, to put an end to the rampant impunity and punish the perpetrators of violence, murder, and torture. There is no peace without justice. That's the name of the association hosting us today, which I thank from my heart. It is not possible to create a climate of harmony, of unity, of future perspectives without bringing to justice those who are responsible of the atrocities and violences. Now, obviously, the setting up of the investigation commission, which was set up by human rights, was a very important step, fundamental to bring to justice those who have violated rights and duties. For this reason, it is essential that all parties involved should be granted the total freedom of investigation. This is one of the essential points to hope and work for a lasting peace. And being a reporter for the European Parliament, I am also well aware of the role that the European Union has been almost irrelevant, notwithstanding the many activities. The selfishness of many member states who undermined all of our efforts, and that was meant to bring peace into Libya. I am also convinced that there is going to be a turning point which is also taking place in Europe, so as to bring on a level playing field solidarity and rights, so the respect and acknowledgement of rights and duties. Justice is not an abstract concept, but rather the soul that pervades every aspect of public life. We have to do whatever we can to prevent victims who have been denied all rights, including almost always, if not too often, the right to life, are being deprived also of the right to truth and justice. I would like to thank truly all of the speakers, and I ask them to stay within the time limits that was given to them. Let's say some 7 minutes maximum. And quite clearly, this is only a suggestion, a proposal, and it would be very much appreciated for them to stick to the time limits. And I am truly honored and happy to pass the floor to Mohamed Ojar, who is also Minister of Justice and President of the United Nations Investigation Commission as to Human Rights. He was permanent and standing representative of Morocco with the United Nations in Geneva. And he was there in 2014, 2017. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Shukran. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, Honorable Mr. Giuliano,
يشرفني
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in my capacity as the chairperson of the independent fact-finding mission to Libya, I am honored to have been invited to take part in this important event chaired by His Excellency, Honorable Mr. Giuliano Pisapia. The independent fact-finding mission to Libya was established by the Resolution 4339 of the United Nations Human Rights Council in June 2020 for a period of 1 year. It expressed a deep concern at the impact of the security, economic, and humanitarian situation in Libya on its people, and the continued mass displacement and the violations and abuses of international human rights law and international humanitarian law committed in Libya, and underlined the importance of restoring the rule of law throughout Libya. In doing so, the Human Rights Council requested the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to immediately establish and dispatch a fact-finding mission to Libya to investigate violations and abuses of human rights and international humanitarian law throughout Libya by all parties since the beginning of 2016. To this end, the 3 members of the FFM were appointed by the High Commissioner on 19th August 2020. I am Mohammed Ojar from Morocco, have had the privilege of being nominated as the chair to serve together with my distinguished colleagues, Tracy Robinson from Jamaica, although regrettably she was unable to join us today, and Shaloka Bayani from Zambia, UK, who joined me today from London. The establishment of this FFM comes in the context of a rapid expansion we have seen in recent years in the number of human rights investigations mandated by the UN Human Rights Council as a key tool to counter impunity by identifying the causes of human rights concerns and promoting accountability so that further human rights violations are prevented and deterred. These investigative bodies have undertaken critical work by gathering and information, creating an historical record of events, and providing a basis for further investigations and accountability. Their contributions also include recommendation of measures to redress violations, provide justice and reparations to victims, and hold the perpetrators to account, including by identifying individuals that are allegedly responsible. It is important to highlight that the FFM Libya's eventual establishment would not have been possible without years of firm and principled advocacy by civil society groups, as well as the key supporters, including many of the EU member states present today. And the last but not the least, the strong support of the UN recognized the government of Libya in this regard. Pleased to see that this event is joined by His Excellency Dr. Nasser Al-Faraj Al-Ghita, the distinguished representative from the Libyan Ministry of Justice. In doing so, I would like to highlight the great importance this FFM attaches to the full support given by the government of Libya to this mandate. We appreciate the willingness of the Libyan government to engage and cooperate FFM and look forward to having a constructive relationship with these authorities in the delivery of its mandate. Mr. Chair, the mandate that has been given to this FFM is significant in its scope. The resolution calls for the FFM to establish the facts and circumstances of the situation of human rights throughout Libya and to collect and review relevant information to document alleged violations and abuses of international humanitarian rights law and international humanitarian law by all parties in Libya since the beginning of 2016, including any gender dimensions of such violations and abuses. The resolution further clearly emphasizes the importance of preventing impunity and ensuring accountability, and it also gives us the mandate to preserve evidence with a view to ensuring that perpetrators of violations or abuses of international humanitarian rights law and international humanitarian law are held accountable. Accountability is therefore a key element of our mandate. The fact that If the mandate is a broad one, means it affords the FFM to the flexibility to identify and document a wide range of alleged violations and abuses of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, which merit focused attention, including violations particularly targeting or affecting children. Some issues including alleged extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, torture, sexual and gender-based violence, conditions of detention, and the situation of migrants and human rights defenders are mentioned in the resolution. In the short time since we began our work, we have already amassed a significant amount of information relevant to our mandate from sources, which will help us to now fine-tune our focus and define our investigative priorities. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, as we begin our work, we do so within the context of many operational challenges. The first hurdle we faced was the delay in the adoption of the resolution due to COVID-19, which left the duration of the FFM well short of 12 months originally foreseen. Fortunately, during the Human Rights Council October session last month, the Council mandate of the FFM until September 2021. The FFM will therefore present its report to the HRC at the 48th session in September 2021. Another factor that made it imperative to postpone the FFM's reporting timelines was the delay in the recruitment of the Secretariat to support our work, which has been delayed due to the UN regular budget liquidity crisis. Is that the Secretariat can be in place early next year, so we can begin our investigations in full force. Finally, the prospects for us and the Secretariat staff to travel to Libya and the neighboring countries to meet directly with key interlocutors, including victims and witnesses, remain uncertain, subject to the security situation and COVID-19 restrictions. We hope to undertake in 2021 missions to Tripoli and Benghazi, as well as the south, and to Palermo and Niger. In this regard, we are pleased to note that we have received reassurances that the government of Libya stands to extend the full cooperation, including receiving the FFM in Tripoli and other areas under its control. We count on the cooperation of other stakeholders, and particularly the Libyan armed forces, to access the full territory of Libya to the maximum extent possible. In this regard, we call on the support of those present today to ensure that the FFM is provided with the full financial and other resources that are requested. Any shortfalls in the allocation of necessary resources for the FFM will undermine our ability to discharge our mandate and to be able to meet the expectations of the international community at this critical juncture for Libya. By establishing the FFM, the international community has sent an important signal to the countless victims in Libya that their plight is not forgotten and that it stands behind them in pursuit of justice and responsibility. We cannot let them down. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, it is with those victims and the people of Libya that we express to you our deep commitment to discharge this important mandate by upholding the highest standards of impartiality, independence, objectivity, and moral integrity to the best of our capabilities. Today, as we address the European Parliament, there are some signs that prospects of peace and stability for the people of Libya may be increasingly within reach. The Libyan people have long told the international community that long-term peace and security in Libya can only come about when there is an end to impunity and when there is justice for crimes committed and for grave harm suffered. The core objective of this mission is to assist, accompany, and support the people of Libya in their own fight for truth, justice, and accountability. Ending impunity and ensuring accountability as an integral part of the efforts to bring long-lasting peace to Libya are ultimately the goals we are working towards in conducting our work in line with the solution. line with the resolution establishing the mandate. It is our hope that our efforts will lead to concrete accountability outcomes as well as tangible human rights improvements in Libya and ultimately towards a peaceful future for the people of Libya. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for your words. We know that your commitment comes from far away and is looking really far into the future. Many thanks for your words. Many thanks for your commitment again. And now I would like to ask some questions to Professor Cialoca Abigani. Questions that have got to do with what to do, what are the perspectives for the future. Cialoca Abigani is Associate Professor of International Law with the Department of Jurisprudence of the London School. He is great and knowledgeable about these topics. Now, the first question, Professor Abigani, having seen the situation and the plight of human rights in Libya, do you already have an idea of how to conduct the investigations?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. It's a pleasure to be invited to share some perspectives with you in the course of your meeting. So from the time when we were appointed, we've been carrying out consultations to build a picture of the situation of violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in Libya. And we are guided very much by Human Rights Council Resolution 4339, which requires us to carry out investigations throughout Libya. So the geographic scope is very wide, and also to carry out investigations in the context of investigations as regards violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law as regards all sides. So impartiality, fairness is the hallmark of our work at this particular point in time. But it's also true that since we've been set up, we've been hampered by the freeze on hiring in the UN. So our resources are very thin on the ground. We have a skeletal Secretariat, which is working with us. So our work in earnest will begin when our Secretariat is fully established, perhaps from next year, February. But of course, we've identified a range of issues that the chair has mentioned in his statement already. Enforced disappearances, detention, gender, sexual-based violence, issues of the rights of migrants or the violations of the rights of migrants, both victims of trafficking, smuggling, as well as asylum seekers. The question of pushing back migrants from the Mediterranean back to Libya, which all the consultations indicate that Libya may not be a safe port of embarkation. We're also looking into third-party involvement, quite obviously, because the resolution does ask us to consult with the African Union, with the Arab League, and of course, UNSMIL. And in this regard, we're building a picture. The perpetrators, where the evidence leads to, and trying to identify those in very concrete ways. We're also taking a victim-centered approach to look at the plight of victims and how to redress them as regards the violations that they have suffered. There are many other related aspects as well, such as the illicit flow of finances in Libya, which is funding the conflict, obviously. The issue of the flow of arms into Libya as well, to identify the networks for both arms, finances, networks for smuggling and trafficking, which very often tend to be interrelated. You find the same networks operating in all of those. So this is the picture that we are building, and the specific methods of investigation will obviously involve on-site investigation, i.e. travel to Libya when the COVID situation allows and when our budget also allows in the context of our Secretariat. And also to visit Libya from Tunisia, where our Secretariat will be best when those situations arise. And of course, we have to cover the breadth of the country, east, west, Benghazi, Tripoli, and that will depend very much on the cooperation of the GNA, which we have been assured. But there are also areas that are under the control of non-government forces whose cooperation we will need in order to visit those areas.
Grazie, professore, ma mi chiedo come...
Many thanks, dear professor, but I'm wondering, how can you think that you will reach Libya, travel across Libya, try and understand where these violations took place in such a context of a pandemic, which makes everything difficult, not to speak of traveling and many criticalities? In part, you have already answered, but with respect to the pandemic, how do you believe that you will be in a position of granting personal security, safety? What is the commitment? Where are you directed with your own commitment? What is the direction?
I think there we have to assess the way in which the COVID situation unfolds. We are aware at the moment that if you arrive in Libya, you may be quarantined for maybe up to 7 or 10 days. Ambassador Nasser might confirm that, which means that for those days, your work is not being carried out. So obviously that would not work. But we're looking into methods of remote investigations, methods that relate to imagery, satellite imagery. There are methods that have been at least used by civil society, which can be verified and which may be accurate and credible in terms of collecting information, from afar. And I think that many human rights bodies are actually now beginning to get onto platforms that can lead them to the evidence, and the evidence leading, to the identification of the perpetrators. And so we are not completely handcuffed by the fact that there's a COVID situation. There are other methods that we can use, and we've been looking at these methods. Other bodies have used them as well.
Un'ultima domanda, come riuscite a interloquire?
One last question. How can you reach out to the organized civil society groups which are present in the different areas? Have you already started debating, discussing with them? Do you have any perspectives with that respect? How can you reach out to them so as to turn them into actors or protagonists? Protagonist of justice, obviously.
We have indeed already reached out to civil society. In fact, all our initial meetings have been with civil society. There's the civil society that works on Libya, that's abroad and that's outside of Libya, very well informed in terms of what they're doing. Obviously, we can't disclose names because we have to protect our witnesses as we go. We have spoken to civil society in Libya as well, through partners that are in Libya to have organized this. And indeed, as we speak again, we are on the agenda on Friday to speak to civil society. So we place a premium value on the importance of civil society. They've done a great deal of work in Libya. Most of them were also advocates for the setting up of the FFM, and we see them as partners to cooperate with them throughout the process of investigation. the main problem that we have, I think, is information outreach in terms of what we have done so far in our consultations and what we intend to do again, and I will be addressing that as a matter of strategy.
Grazie moltissimo anche per questa risposta.
Thank you for this answer. Unfortunately, during fake news periods, having and gathering and collecting information is going to be very difficult. I can only imagine how difficult it is in this country. So many thanks for your commitment. Many thanks from all of us for what you're doing. And now I would like to pass the floor to Professor Al-Ghida, Counselor for Human Rights and Libyan Justice. From his word, we expect to receive some signals of hopes, and also we hope to hear from him what is happening in Libya and what is this attempt to receive some peace and to attain peace in this country. What is the future prospect?
No.
Can you hear me now? Hello, everyone. Well, let me thank the organizers. First of all, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this important briefing. It is an honor to me to speak before the European Parliament, an institution which is well known for its stand for democracy and human rights. And it's and also I would like, as I said, to thank the participants and also the organizers for organizing this briefing. Gross violations of human rights is not new to Libya. The previous regime of Gaddafi ruled the country with an iron fist, with absolute dictatorship, where political and civil rights were very much restricted. Political parties were not allowed to organize, to form political parties or to participate in the public life. Freedom expressions were non-existent in the country. So after the revolution of 17th February, there was hope that will be a new era where break out with the old practices of human rights violations, and it was a dream almost come true to many Libyans when we see human rights protected in the declaration and the constitutional declarations, and where elections were held to select and to elect members of parliament to represent the people of Libya. But later on, the situation changed, where there was fractions and different groups turned into violence in order to pass their own agenda, and also especially in 2015. So since that time, gross violations of human rights were committed, such as forced disappearance, unlawful killing, and even sometimes serious violations of international humanitarian law. The situation even more with the armed attack on Tripoli on the 4th of April 2019, when forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar trying to take over the capital. An armed conflict that lasted for more than a year, where civilian population were attacked. So we have a casualty of hundreds of civilian casualties, and also civilian facilities were attacked. To name a few examples, the attack on facilities hosting illegal migrants were attacked. So the attack on the military academy, where 26 people were killed, students were killed. The expulsion of the Al-Qani militia from Tarhuna at the beginning of this year revealed a gloomy situation where tens of mass graves were discovered, and hundreds, almost up to 100 bodies have been recovered from that mass graves, which were people were killed by this. We were operating without control at that time. The situation, violation of human rights and international human rights law, points to the failure of both national legal system and also international mechanisms to address the issue of human rights violations and hold those responsible for this into justice and accountable for their actions. In my opinion, the national justice sector cannot operate in a vacuum. It needs full support of another institutions, especially police forces, the internal security forces, which seems to be divided and weak in the face of armed militias. So the state has no monopoly of armed. Sometimes the militia seems to be stronger than the state institutions. The state, the General Attorney's Office has issued a list of arrest warrants against those responsible for human rights violations, like such example in Tarhuna. But none of those responsible were held into accountable. No. So right now, what was the situation is the political divisions in Libya, where an eastern part of the country is governed by a government, and the west of Libya is governed by the government of national accord, a government that's been recognized by the international community. So it is difficult to implement a judicial order against a person who lives in the east, and vice versa. And the same comes through when it comes to international justice. We have since the referral of the Libyan situation to the International Criminal Court and the start of investigation by the Attorney General of that court into Libya, several arrest warrants against individuals has been issued, but none of them has been implemented. So the same goes through for this, for the weaknesses of both national and international mechanisms is a clear picture of the failure of both systems to deal with human rights violations in Libya. Another contributing factor for ongoing, which has worsened the situation and assist for those who are committing human rights violations is the political division in Libya. As I mentioned, therefore I believe ending the transitional period and this division at the national level is a key factor to stop any further violations of human rights. I hope to establish a government of national unity. I think it's a major step for violations of human rights, and also to enable the institutions and judicial institutions to look into violations or previous violations of human rights. What is needed at this level of the international community, I believe, is the support to the ongoing dialogue that's going on in Tunis now, in order to end the political divisions and establish a unified government for all of Libya. This will enable, as I said, the internal security to be strengthened, and also the judicial institutions in Libya, the National Judicial Institution, which I believe is the one is responsible for protecting human rights, and it's closer to the victim and to the scenes of the crimes. We think it is the national and the natural judiciary that is able to address human rights violations in Libya. We in the Ministry of Justice have taken the approach of believing that dealing with human rights violations in Libya, whether it is in the past or in current time, needs to be dealt with as a whole in the process of transitional justice, because Libya has undergone a transition period since 2011. It's emerging from a country which was run by dictatorship. So many accumulated violations from the past. I think if any national system, any traditional national judicial system is unable to deal with all these violations, So there is a need for a transitional justice process that will not only try those responsible for committing human rights, but also contribute to the establishment of the truth, compensations for the victims, and also assurance of non-reoccurrence of human rights violations. With the ongoing dialogue, I think nothing should affect the noble cause of bringing peace to Libya. If there is a good development, that's the ceasefire, which means there's no more attack on civilians, no more casualty, which is a good step. The next step is to bring peace and stability to Libya through a forming of national unified government, and to end this transitional period that Libya has been going since 2011 by allowing the Libyan people to vote on a referendum for their for the draft constitution, which has been drafted and ready. So this will answer all the concerns of the people and pave the way for a national and unified institutions, whether it is a legislative institution or the executive institutions. However, any support for the peace process in Libya and the political dialogue should not mean or suggest that the perpetrators of mass human rights violations and war crimes should not be impunity and should not play a role in the shaping of the future of Libya. We in the Ministry of Justice believe while the peace process should support it, the process of collecting evidence and establishing the fact about gross violations for human rights in Libya is important. Therefore, the Ministry of Justice and also the government of national accord welcomed and even suggested the establishment of the fact-finding missions. And the Human Rights Council, thankfully, responded to this initiative and established the commission headed by Excellency Mr. Oja, who's with us today, and we, as the Ministry of Justice, has stressed its support for this commission and when willing to participate to cooperate with it with the mission once it is in Libya. I think preserving the evidence and establish what happened in Libya in terms of gross violation of human rights and to international humanitarian law is important for any future judicial process for bringing those responsible for human rights violations. We believe fighting impunity in Libya is important for peace and for human rights protection in the future. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Grazie moltissimo, veramente.
Thank you very much for the passion you injected in your words for what you have done and what you're doing. As we said, there are lights and shades. Some of the lights are being switched on, some hopes are coming forward, and your commitment, as we know, is huge. On our own side, we can only take upon ourselves the commitment as members of European Parliament. And we will ascertain you that we will with you, we will be siding you, we will give our contribution in terms of expertise, knowledge, but also our economic support, because we well know that this is fundamental to take further steps forward, the ones that you mentioned. And now I would like to pass the floor to Mr. Pizzuti, someone who's very much expert in any such matters. That's his own passion. And he's also capable of finding answers for any of the issues we are dealing with today. He's also the founder of a prize, and I would like to pass him the floor, since he's a colleague.
of the panel. It's great to be here with you, and thank you for your contribution. I would like briefly to discuss about the responsibility of first states involvement in the conflict, in the Libyan conflict, and also to allegation of human rights and IHL violations in this regard. Now, if we believe, as has been said, that impunity is a factor that contributes to the instability of Libya, necessarily also allegation concerning first states implication in human rights and IHL violation needs to be addressed, investigated. Now, I'd like to focus on the main allegations of such human rights violation and IHL violations, which have been raised by the UN, other bodies and states with respect to third countries' involvement in the conflict. First of all, the violation of a UN arms embargo. The UN panel of experts on Libya, for instance, highlighted in 2019 lastly that a number of countries, including United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Turkey, are routinely violating the arms embargo. Now, this per se is a real violation of the UN Security Council resolution issued under Chapter 7. I refer to 1970 resolution. And thus, it's also a violation of the UN Charter, especially Article 25. However, when the military support these countries are allegedly provided to the parties engaged into the conflict, resulting in IHL violation, then when we have different forms of responsibility as well. For instance, Article 1 of the Geneva Convention, as interpreted by the ICRC, obliges states to refrain from providing, encourage, or assisting parties engaged into the conflict in violating IHL provisions. Moreover, when the military support or logistical support to party of the conflict resulting in international crimes or war crimes, then it attracts also individual responsibility. And this is very important. Individual responsibility for international crimes is important to stress, as has already been stressed, that ICC has already jurisdiction for international crimes committed in the context of the conflict. Then the military support that contributes to war crimes, for instance, may be qualified as a form of assistance of aiding and abetting the crimes under Article 25.3c and Article 25.3d of the ICC statute. I want to say that these similar concerns were also endorsed by the Commission on the UN Commission on Yemen, especially vis-à-vis the states' assistance in military support of the parties to the conflict. Now, I pass to the second allegation that is actually being reported by a number of UN bodies, which is basically connected to the airstrikes conducted by foreign countries in the territory of Libya. Now, the UN panel of experts highlighted how airstrikes conducted by foreign countries resulted in killing of civilians. These allegations are particularly disturbing because so far there is not a clear assessment of the attribution or responsibility of such attacks. No state so far has claimed paternity of responsibility for this operation. However, assessing the responsibility and the attribution for this kind of attack is has the utmost importance, given the fact that these attacks may be qualified disproportionate and indiscriminate as they result in civilian casualties, and thus they may be in violation of IHL provisions, as well as they may be qualified as war crimes. I now want to pass to the third main allegation that recently has been highlighted, which is basically the use and deployment of mercenaries groups in Libya. This was raised by the UN Secretary General, as well as the UN panel of experts, and recently the UN working groups concerning the use of mercenaries highlighted that Turkey and Russia are recruiting and deploying groups of mercenaries on the side of both GNA and LNA. Especially, the Wagner group, which is a group of mercenaries which apparently has been deployed on the side of LNA, has been implicated by the US government in human rights violation, especially in Tripoli, with the lading of explosive devices in civil areas. Now, assessing in this case the link between these first states and the mercenaries in the context of this allegation is extremely important. Per se, the deployment of mercenaries is already in violation of the UN arms embargo, triggering the responsibility I explained earlier. However, if it's established that there is the states acts in effect exercise effective control over this group of mercenaries, that automatically they would bear the responsibility for their action. And I want also to say, most probably, it would be possible to conclude that the human rights obligation of these states would apply extraterritorial also in Libya. Now, this consideration I made vis-a-vis these third countries also equally applies to violation committed against migrants. And I'm really happy that the members of the fact-finding mission highlighted the problem of the human rights violation committed against migrants. For years, European countries' contribution in the area of migration with the Libyan authorities has been resulted in their support of human rights violation and practices that falls way below international human rights standards. I want to say that it's possible that crimes committed against migrants may also be qualified as war crimes in this regard. Now, migrants as citizens of Libya have been affected by the conflict, as being highlighted, for instance, before in the attack of Tajura, for instance, in July 2019, where this airstrike resulted in the killing of 53 civilians, including migrants. Now, it's important to highlight in this context that any state assistance to other states' wrongdoing or international wrongful act may actually attract its responsibility as a form of complicity under Article 16 of the Article of State Responsibility, including assisting in war crimes. Now, and I come to an end of my contribution, and I hope I didn't enter too much into the technicalities of the topic I wanted to deal. In any case, I want to highlight how first state involvement now in Libya is so inextricably linked to the conflict, as well to the human rights violation that occur in this context, that any attempt to investigate this violation necessarily needs to include a comprehensive assessment of these acts. Instead, overlooking this question may result in a violation of the victim's right to know the truth of the serious human rights violation they suffered and to establish full accountability for the perpetrator of these acts. Clearly, as I believe, and as has been said before, the fact-finding mission on Libya's mandate includes also the allegation I described above, and I really hope that they may also include, them also investigate these allegations. However, I don't think that they can be left alone in this challenge. States need to cooperate, European Union needs to cooperate with the fact-finding mission on Libya in promoting peace and ending the impunity and ending EU's caused violations. And here I conclude my remarks.
Many thanks, Mr. Pizzuti. Many thanks also for having recalled the theme, which is going to be a very difficult one to overcome, which is the one of war crimes, but also the one of the presence of mercenary groups in Libya. And quite obviously, if we cannot turn them away and ascertain the responsibilities of the mercenary groups, that step forward, the much hoped step forward, is going to be very hard to achieve. And now let me just recall not only to all of us, but also to myself, that the European Union means that we are united in diversities. So this is the hope, and the hope is the one of having a country united not only in diversity, but also in peace. This is a very difficult task, and now I would like to pass the floor to the organizers of this meeting and to many more collaborators. And I would like to thank also the translators who are confronted with this kind of activity. Mr. Nicolò, doctor in international right, Salamanca. As to the specific moment, I think that you are also the Secretary General of an association in which we all deeply believe. And I myself was accepting and subscribing the fact that there is no peace without justice. So I wish you some success in what you aim at creating, and also with respect to your own association. Your reflections and considerations are going to prove very useful, and they will be appreciated by all of us who are listening. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. The conclusions, as a matter of fact, and luckily, I would like to say that all of the speakers and the rapporteurs could draw their own conclusions during their own contributions. This simplified my task. We are now approaching the end of this meeting, and I must, in the first place, thank Member of Parliament and Honorable Mr. Pisapia, who hosted us in this session. His role as a rapporteur and with the European Parliament about Libya is very important. A standing rapporteur on Libya within the European Parliament is very important. It is highly significant because it establishes sort of a connection. It plays a liaison role amongst all of the instances who are dealing with Libya, such as the Delegation for Human Rights, the Delegation of Maghreb countries, and other instances and places where Libya is mentioned. We know that there are a number of facets representing Libya to the eyes of Europe. What I believe, and what I think is more obvious and clear, is that Libya, seen as a transit country for migrants, is really a Libya which is not reflecting the reality of this territory. And looking at Libya from the angle of migration only is not only harmful for Europe, but it's also very much damaging for Libya itself. I believe that it clearly emerged that the disaster we are witnessing, the one of the violation of human rights in Libya, which was perpetrated in these last years, and most of all ever since political violence was restored once again in 2014, is a disaster that did not come from heaven. It's not like a thunderbolt. It's not provoked by climatic changes, but it's rather the result of precise choices of individuals who thought that acquiring and winning the power through violence would have been much easier, much more easier than acquiring the power and ascending to power in a context of peace, which is much more difficult. Violence perpetrated in Libya is a violence that was perpetrated to the purpose of gaining power. And although we support the desire of going to power, we know that violence is de facto rewarding itself as the legitimate way to achieve power. So I believe that the message coming from almost all of our speakers and rapporteurs is that the cycle of violence and impunity is a cycle which can be interrupted through the denial of legitimacy of those who use violence to acquire power and to detain power. And although Libya's reality is a highly complex one because of its geography, because of its tribal realities and familiar realities, and its urban realities, what could bring together all of the Libyans in a Pacific Libya is a Libya which enjoys the fruits of mediation and of political compromise and definitely rejects violence, especially political violence. From this point of view, I think that I can feel as deeply encouraged from the words spoken by Mr. Nasser from the Ministry of Justice. And I am extremely grateful to those working with the fact-finding mission because of their testimonies, because of their fact-finding and fact-checking, and in giving voice to the injustices suffered by the victims and by the legitimate hope for peace. We know that when referring to there is no peace without justice, we are only simply acknowledging the fact that while trying to find peace by giving even more power and allowing the perpetrators of violence, we once again allow for the continuation of the death cycle, a cycle that brings to widespread fatalities and casualties. And this brings us back to a situation which preceded the revolution. So the force of arms and weapons of violence and cruelty was exactly what was giving legitimacy to attain power. So I believe that the wishes coming from all of us is that the political dialogue should involve our social forces, even the civil forces and civil society representatives, should all of them be addressing peace and peacemaking. I would now switch to the English language.
The other important message I think that came through is that the reality is that the responsibilities go beyond Libya. Not only the political responsibilities, but also the criminal and state responsibilities for the crimes committed inside the country. Where we're talking about mercenaries and Dr. Pizzuto mentioned the Wagner Group. Those are not mercenaries that one can purchase on the free market. Those are mercenaries that are state agents. When we talk about aviation, bombing through aircraft, those are not things that can be purchased on the free market. Those are aviations of national military of foreign countries. So to shy away from the responsibility, legal state responsibility and individual criminal responsibility for those foreign actors that have deliberately pursued a policy of atrocities in order to gain power and foothold in the country, that have turned the country into a proxy war where they have actually also been engaged directly. This is an essential part of the accountability puzzle. If we deliberately avert our eyes, if we deliberately do not look at what we call in Italian, the mandanti, the people who commission the crimes, who are abroad and who are state actors, but who are also individuals in positions of powers, then we are essentially ignoring the biggest driver of impunity and violence. And I think this is important to bear in mind, that when we're talking about the victims, we should talk about also where the equations that brought the calculation of that is cheaper and is easier to gain power through atrocities, that often those calculations were made also abroad. And the final lesson that I draw from this is the important role of civil society. I think it was mentioned by the chair and also of the fact-finding mission, also by Professor Cialota. The important civil society is an important counterpart for international investigation. By Dr. Nasser, as civil society as an important part of their interactions in seeking justice. I think as we pledge our commitment as Europeans, if you like, to do better and to do more, and to be more united and more clear in respect of impunity in Libya, a redress for human rights violations, this theme and this priority of civil society support is one that has been mentioned by all the speakers. I'm sure I have not done justice to the complexity and the richness of what our panelists, our esteemed high-level panelists, have contributed, but I hope that at least this can be the first of many exchanges within this remarkable group. And thank you again to the chair and to everybody for having taken part.